Yeah.
everything. It's kind of it's like we shock. We say, no, don't use the word. But in Germany, but in England, it's different. I mean, remember like Prince William. We had this T-shirt with a swastika on at the party once there.
Yeah.
And all the Sex Pistols, Sid Vicious running around with a
Yeah.
swastika T-shirt. So that was definitely a way to provoke. And the English are also were always very interested in a World War II history. So they are easy about it. And of course, playing with that, subject is provoking people a lot. And so I guess the movement of punk rock, the punk rock movement from which Joy Division comes, is definitely associated with provoking people. And so they're playing with symbols. And it's just people, it's part of their culture, it's part of their, part of their background and part of the way of communicating with people rather than just like a real political message.
Hello and welcome to the second episode of the video podcast, The Cultural Abyss. And today we have a very exciting and very rarely covered topic, which I will discuss with, an old friend of mine, Robert Sommer from Berlin, whom I welcome very much. Hello.
Hello, thanks for being here.
Yeah. Robert Sommer is a historian, and I met him many years ago when he actually invited me to a conference at Ravensbrück concentration camp memorial site. And I was really like kind of in shock because I'm like a film scholar and film historian. So to be asked by a memorial site to participate in a conference is really serious stuff. So the fact is that the reason was that I wrote my PhD on Nazi exploitation films. At least a part of this book is about that. And some of these films, even some more serious films like The Night Porter in the 70s, covered what could be called a concentration camp brothel situation, like forced sexual labor in the Third Reich, especially in the concentration camp context. So the reason Robert invited me was his conference was about this forced sexual labor in not only under Nazi rule, but also in other contexts. So I was talking about the fictionalization of something which is really grim and a really harsh reality, which is not often discussed in academics. So I'm very happy that we can do that now. And as it happens, your book, Das KZ-Bordell, which is the German PhD you wrote, has now been published in English, The Concentration Camp Brothel, Forced Sexual Labor Under Nazi Rule at Fordham University Press, actually last year. So maybe people are interested in how did you come to this special topic and where do you come from actually, Robert?
A lot of questions to start with, but I'm happy to talk to you about this. Well, thank you. Thanks again for being having the opportunity to talk to you today. Yeah, it's just a few remarks about what you just said. I mean, it's been I don't know how many years, something like 15 years at least or
15
something,
years, I
maybe
guess.
15 years that we met
Yeah.
first. We have something in common, which is actually that I'm actually not a historian. Everybody thinks I'm a historian, but I'm actually a cultural scientist, Kulturwissenschaftler as you are. So we do have this in common. So my approach onto the subject was really not from the historical side, from the historiographical side, which also made me kind of a black sheep among the scholars in those days when I started. And I had a lot of red lines, not red lines to cross, but walls to break, doors to break in, walls to push down to be able to talk about the subject. So first of all, my background is I'm an East German boy. I grew up in Eastern Germany. I was 15 when the wall came down, and for me the world opened up, and I traveled the world. I lived in the United States. I lived in Italy for 12 years. And this is where I got my interest in also Italian films. And, the films you were just mentioning, the sexploitation films, I mean, they are pretty big. I mean, I remember the La Repubblica, the newspaper, had this weekly edition where they had the extra video cassette in there. And it's kind of interesting because you have this like left-wing newspaper, and then you watch these movies and you see these horrible things on footage. Ilsa, the chief of the SS, for instance. I mean, that was definitely the toughest one to watch. But also other ones like Bruno Mattei's films and whatever. So I had this interest in kind of dark movies rather than not dark movies, like horror movies. I loved Pasolini. I actually learned Italian by watching Pasolini. And I also worked in a movie theater years ago. I was actually a projector. I was like changing the projectors. And I remember one of the toughest evenings I had is showing Salo by Pasolini, the 120 Days of Sodom, twice in evening for a week, which really was kind of traumatizing, especially when when you had to watch it and you had to change like the pizza, as they call them, the rolls. So anyway, I had been, and then actually after I lived in Italy not too long, I lived in Italy for a long time. I was still inscribed at the university in cultural studies, at the cultural studies faculty of the Humboldt University in Berlin. And there was a moment when I had to decide what to do with my lifetime. And I thought, let's get a degree now. So after years of like enjoying my life in Italy, watching, dark movies and drinking good wine and having great conversations with people, I kind of decided, I want to do something which really interests me and something which is important. I kind of was looking for an importance in my lifetime as well. So I ended up taking a class with my professor, who ended up being my doctor father, Hartmut Böhme, Professor Dr. Hartmut Böhme, who actually used to be one of the major, under the icons of cultural studies, now retired. But and he had a seminar, actually a class on violence generally. And there were two parts of it. And the first one was generally on Wolfgang Zofsky's approach on violence, about Elias Canetti, mass and power. And then actually the second one was on the Nazis. And so we kind of reading Zofsky, of course, you get into that. And so we had a field trip. And we had a class field trip, which brought us to Auschwitz. And we were at Auschwitz, and this is about 2000, for about a week. Now, everybody who goes to Auschwitz knows the difficulty of being there. People can't handle being there for 3 hours. And once you walk to the crematorium sites and learn about the history of the crematoriums, I mean, it's kind of what I always consider the darkest point of history. That's the end of mankind, I would say. That kind of shocks you. But 6 days, it felt like 6 months, actually. So we were there with our professor, and actually we were there with 7 survivors. And one day we were walking by the main camp. We were walking into in the main camp. And there's this, the iconic saying like "Arbeit macht frei," and right behind it there was a building which now is hosts the archives, and there was a thing which is the brothel. And one of our survivors, he talked about it. He said, "Hey, there was a brothel out there." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's what I heard about it. Joy Division, brothels was Jewish women for the guards." And he says, no, not for the guards. Actually, the women in there were Polish. And my friend, who was actually my prisoner as well, he went there too. And I said, wait a second, you're talking about a brothel in the camp for prisoners with non-Jewish women, which is exactly the opposite what I heard about it. And that got me interested in it. And when I had a subject for my master thesis, I thought, okay, well, why don't I just find out more about it? So I slipped into it, and I never got out of it. And now 25 years later, I'm sitting here and still talking about it.
Still talking about it, yeah.
My book is still talking about it. And my book has been finally, translated to English, thanks to, I really have to say, this is a great thing, because Fordham University Press even paid for the translation, which is a super, it's a costly thing, which doesn't happen in these days anymore. People just can't get books translated because there's no fundings anymore in Germany for translations for Holocaust books. That's my story short.
So German academic work is often marginalized because of language issues. So a lot of German texts which are taken seriously in German contexts are not even known abroad because of the lack of translation. So I totally agree to that. And I had this problem in the past as well.
Hmm.
My PhD, Sadiko Narzista, which covers the films you talked about,
Uh-oh.
is partly translated with certain chapters in other books, but it's not translated as a whole. I'm planning to do that in future because the book still holds up as
Hmm.
does your book, because I think we were onto things which were themselves marginalized within research before that. So you mentioned one thing which is really important and gave the title to this episode, the Joy Division. So for me, it was really a discovery when I got into goth rock and post-industrial music and so on. And then I came across the origins of the name Joy Division of the British band, and the interest that two members of the band, especially the singer, had in the history of the Third Reich, which is not uncommon because in Great Britain it's very usual to be brought up with TV and streaming programs covering the war. So there is a huge cult of the Second World War in Great Britain, and I was told this by several people. And there are other bands actually like Death in June and so on covering these things as well. But Joy Division is the name which was given to the concentration camp brothel, especially popularized in a book called The House of Dolls. So we will talk about this book as well soon, but first, Joy Division. Did you have a connection with the band Joy Division and this topic you covered later?
I love Joy Division, and I was just actually listening to Warsaw, which was the old name of Joy Division, just
Yeah,
right before the show, just right before the recording now. So I'm
very
actually
good.
on a Warsaw on a Joy Division mood right now. I really do like this music a lot. I'm also like into that kind of stuff, music, punk rock, dark wave, post rock, post industrial, industrial, whatever. If you name it. And Joy Division had always been an interesting band and also controversial because of what he was just saying, because the play was symbols of Nazism, and especially the Joy Division. And I mean, as we know right now from the scandal in Australia, the Prime Minister had a T-shirt with Joy Division, and there
Yeah.
was a massive scandal and saying, "Oh, you're anti-Semitic," whatever. Yeah, and that is kind of a strange thing. But one of the things you have to see that the English have a different approach on Nazism. They call you the food Nazi, and they don't mean like Nazi. They call you are the food Nazi, or you're the Nazi because you organize
Yeah.
everything. It's kind of it's like we shock. We say no, don't use the word. But in Germany, but in England, it's different. I mean, remember like Prince William. We had this T-shirt with a swastika on at the party once there.
Yeah.
And all the Sex Pistols there. Johnny Rotten running around with a swastika. Oh no, Sid Vicious running around with a
Yeah.
swastika T-shirt. So that was definitely a way to provoke. And the English are also were always very interested, in World War II history because of the Nazism, the rise of it, and it's just like it's a fascinating subject. Also because they never got this massive destruction as other countries did, like Poland, for instance. They don't talk about the Nazism like this, but because they were massively destroyed. But England, of course, was the Blitz on London and Coventry. Of course, that was, massive destruction there too, but not as much and not to a degree, as it was in other countries. So they are easy about it. And of course, playing with that, subject is provoking people a lot. And so I guess the movement of punk rock, the punk rock movement from which Joy Division comes, is definitely associated with provoking people. And so they're playing with symbols. And that's the problem. I don't I think people have to understand on the other side in Germany and other countries that it's just people. It's part of their culture. It's part of their part of their background and part of the way of communicating with people, rather than just like a real political message.
Mhm. Yeah, it's quite interesting that this special phrase "joy division." I always asked myself, did it come actually from the novel House of Dolls, or was that the official phrase, the translation of anything? Because translated in German, it doesn't really work well.
Mhm.
So, how was the phrasing in original?
So to be honest, the word Joy Division only comes in this context because of the House of Dolls, because of the book.
Yeah.
The House of Dolls is a very influential book. We should not forget this. Written by Kazetnik, and I always forget the number behind it.
Yeah.
But Kazetnik 1,700 something, or I think. This book is
Some more numbers.
yeah, some numbers. This actually is the interesting thing about the book is I mean it's important not to since you brought it up, we should start about talking about this. It's a very important book in history because and in the Holocaust perception. Because the book actually was it's a fictional book about this one guy who talks about his sister, and his sister was in the Joy Division in Auschwitz. And he doesn't really mention a lot of facts about it. But since Kazetnik was in Auschwitz himself, he knows about this, and he also knows about the brothel, which I saw once, passing by at the gate. I saw a few many times, and I was actually inside because inside of it is actually the archives. So actually, when you do research in Auschwitz, you go to the former rooms of the brothel. Joy Division is the word which only appears in this context. He comes up with this. The Nazis never used any similar terms for that. And even the other context of in Asian countries, like the comfort station, it's comfort, so it's a different word as well. And to be honest, I don't even know where this comes from. I guess he just brought it up, and so for this book, this phrase made it into our collective memory. And since everybody after the book was actually the book was considered by the New York Times as the most shocking experience after Anne Frank. So it was put on a level of reality since it was fiction, but then all of a sudden became kind of a book that proved forced sex labor or the existence of these brothels. And so everybody thought about it. Oh, it must be true. And then also Kazetnik, he testified during the Eichmann trials. He was one of the major testimonies, and he actually collapsed. And it was a very dramatic scene. It was, he's like, people try to like get him up again. And he's like, oh, he's shocked and whatever. Very dramatic. And this is also part of his character. He's a very dramatic character. And he also wrote another book, People, which is on people, is the second one he wrote. I think the second or the third or the second one was about the sexual abuse of men in concentration camp. So he covered two of the major subjects of forced of sexual exploitation in a concentration camp right in two books. But that was also fiction. I think partly, I don't know. So, but the fiction made it into reality. Everybody thinks it's true. And so through the name, everybody refers, from the band to the book. And it's already two facts. So the band exists, the book exists, so it must be true. And so it is one of my really serious works, and one of the reasons why everybody is shocked when they hear the title of my book and the content of my research. That because of that book and the band, because Joy Division is there, and it's the brothel with Jewish women for the guards, which actually never existed.
Yeah, we will talk about the reality soon, because that's very important to know how it relates to like your research in the actual historical contexts. But as you mentioned, I would agree the book is very important, and sometimes a kind of myth building and popularization of certain elements can be important for the knowledge which is built on that, especially when a book which obviously covers not the truth about history, but has the idea to find a new iconic model for that. I have seen, for example, cover designs for that book, which are highly sexualized, which show a woman with a bare breast and a field whore, a Feldhure written there, which is also not a term probably used there because it's not the field. Actually, that refers more to the battleground. So I think the heavy sexualization has been part of the upbringing and educational perspective on the concentration camps caused by this book, actually. And as we have the band and we have the book, we also have men's magazines and films, which came out around that time in the 60s when the book already was there. The band was founded in the 70s, for sure, as a post-punk band. And the two main records were around 1980. So
Sorry, 76.
Um, so I would like to cover one film especially because you said there were no Jewish women forced to perform sexually in this context, and there's a very well known, very renowned film by Sidney Lumet called The Pawnbroker, which is about a traumatized man in New York City in the 60s who has flashbacks into his past in Auschwitz, where he witnesses his own, I think his wife, being forced to sexual labor there in the camp. And this has clearly a Jewish background. Are you aware of that film? Did you think about this a bit?
Yeah, I know the Paul Broker, but going back to what you said before, there's a lot of things you said before. First of all, and this fits into your question. I think the problem was like the mystification of these subjects. It does help, of course. It does help to get attention to a subject, but it also creates a kind of a wall, which almost makes it impossible for people to really show the reality. I mean, you especially source it in your book also, like how this covers how this the fictional movies disable us to talk real truly about the facts. So we have this mystification of sexuality in Nazism, right? And so everybody thinks the Nazis were just like these sexual beasts. Black uniforms, as you know, they never existed in Auschwitz. Guys with beautiful guys with black uniforms, raping women, and this has been reproduced all the time. So I'm not saying that there was never sexual violence against Jewish women in a concentration camp. It's a very important subject, and it's been covered recently a lot by writers. But I agree to this Israeli scholar Naama Sheikh, who also was at the conference where we met. Naama Sheikh actually, she said, sexual violence existed, but it never existed in this way. It's described in Auschwitz, and I do totally agree to that. So the sexual violence of women forced into prostitution happened only in camps where there was a mixed population, men and women together. I mean, of course, otherwise you can't have like heterosexual violence. And that was the minority of camps in generally. I mean, only a small number of camps had this, gendered, double gender situation. So women were forced into prostitution, probably like by sold to another couple or by someone, or they also like try to survive by selling sexual favors, like sexual barter is the term we use as scholars for that. So women in the camps would trade a piece of bread for sexual favors, and that was and that relationship was kind of on the edge between violence and kind of it was coercive and not, it was because sometimes these relationships become into like emotional relationships or even like voluntary relationships on both sides. So it's very mixed. But the subject of women, Jewish women especially, being forced into prostitution or being sexually abused is a very big subject, and it's being reproduced all the time. But I have to say, I've never found any evidence on any kind of data from the concentration camps, from the SS, so from the official institution, that there were actually women inside of the brothel. So the Joy Division. I mean, I have the number. I have the number and the names of women who were in the brothel in Auschwitz, and I have all of them, and none of them was Jewish. I mean, I can clearly say that. So I mean, there's something about the mystification which brings ahead which disables us to show the reality, as you were, as we said before. That's a big problem. So we have, it causes, attention, but on the other side, it covers things up. And the movies you said, and the men magazines, and the whole sexploitation movement in Italy. That really kind of blinded us because it put this cover over, so whenever I come and talk about my subject, about the brothels and concentration camp, everybody thinks automatically it's Jewish women forced into prostitution for SS men, and that's and this is the other side I'm dealing with. So part of my book and my research was so severe and so concrete because of that, because I had to fight this for over and over again, and I'm still fighting it. I'm invited to conferences, and especially on the Jewish history, on the Holocaust, on the Shoah. And it's all about Jewish women. And I'm saying, listen, I'm not talking about Jewish women. I'm talking about non-Jewish women. And they look at me and say, what do you mean? And this is the problem. And by
Yeah,
the way,
I see. Yeah.
Kasetnik is still on the reading list for students in Israel. So every Israeli reads that book,
Yeah, I heard
and
that. Yeah.
everybody, yeah. So it's still an ongoing problem, and it's being reproduced all the time. And so the myth is being reproduced, and and now everybody believes it's true.
That's exactly what I wanted to achieve with my own PhD
Mm,
work, because it was about history becoming film, literature, and so on, becoming an image, and then producing a myth about history. So, this
mm,
process was what I wanted to analyze with these films from the 60s and 70s. And some of these films, like you mentioned, Pasolini's Salo, um, Pasolini said this film was more about the presence of a neo-fascist movement in Italy in the 70s. But in fact, if you see it, it works as this, as it's a commentary, a political, but
mm,
also it has a miniature model, a projection of the concentration camp system in general into this villa in Salo, in the Republic of Salo, where Mussolini had his last stand. So it can work that way, that art manages to create metaphors which can be useful to discuss history and to remember history. But
mm,
also, as you mentioned in the novel, and I would argue in the film The Pawnbroker, it also produces images which are, from a historical viewpoint, are misleading. And
mm,
as you said, there were the race laws in Nazi Germany, which actually forbid, especially SS men, who were like the prototypes, meant as the prototypes of this ideology, to have sexual relations to especially Jewish people. And so it's very clear that this is a fantasy which was brought forth by a condensation in popular media. For example, in the men's magazines and the
mm,
Stalag novels in the 60s, and going on from then. So the men's magazines were mainly American-produced magazines with sexual fantasies of male dominance within several contexts, also in World War II, and it can be about a male prisoner becoming a kind of sex slave of an SS woman like Ilsa Shivov of the SS,
mm,
which is also a fantasy, because there were women working as kind of personal in the camps, but they were not appearing as commanders and in black uniforms. As you said, there were no black uniforms and no glamour in these camps. So a very realistic revision of that in cinema was brought forth by Steven Spielberg in Schindler's List, which is quite correct on how he depicts the uniforms and the whole context of the camp. But again, Schindler's List has a very interesting coverage of this desire, sexual desire between an SS man and a Jewish woman, because in this basement scene, very like
mm,
infamous basement scene,
mm,
where it is clear that the Ralph Fiennes character Amon Good desires this Jewish woman, which is his housekeeper, and she's very much sexualized in this image. But he also decides not to approach her sexually, but violently. This was okay in the race law. So I think it's interesting. You can criticize Schindler's List a lot, but it's also a kind of correction on this popular fantasy of the SS man raping the Jewish women. There's also another very renowned film today, which I don't know if it is that renowned, like the other examples I just mentioned. Capo by Gillo Pontecorvo, a film
mm,
very early in the 60s, like very ahead of its time, cast with Susan Strasberg, who used to play Anne Frank in the Broadway plays in the 50s. And she plays a Jewish woman who hides her identity, gets into the camp as like a non-Jewish woman, and then she has a relationship with a German guard there. So this is more of a realistic model. What do you think about this film, Capo?
Yeah, Capos, it certainly is realistic because you have to see that there was an inner stratum in the society in the concentration camp. So we don't really see the line between like on one side were the prisoners, on the other side was the SS. There was always SS men who were cooperating with some of the prisoners. And some of the actually the stories of people of SS men having relationships to women. And I don't know, probably you mentioned Capo, but I mean, what about the zone of interest? I mean, even there is a scene where
Yeah.
Rudolf Hess has his relationship to a Jewish woman. I mean, it's not as depicted as in Schindler's List as obvious, but it's kind of it's there. And there was actually a story about this. There's a story that Rudolf Hess actually, or a rumor that he actually had a story with a woman from a concentration camp, and she was a
Mhm.
capo herself. She was on a higher stratum, and those were the people the SS would be kind of get in contact with. But one first thing you always have to understand: the SS was not allowed to have physical contact to prisoners. Okay, I mean, you can say, well, that was just an order, but of course, it was not as easy for SS men to have that as sexual contact to a woman because there were all the people around in the camp, but there's no place where we could not be seen. So there's always some
Mhm.
witness. And if somebody reported to the SS that you had a sexual relationship to a woman, you were out. I mean, you're even sent to a concentration camp yourself or even shot. So, I mean, it was very dangerous. So the SS men had to watch out for that. Second of all, don't forget, uh, prisoners of concentration camp and capo is different because you see kind of a beautiful woman. You see like kind of a
Mhm.
clean woman. No, this is not the way prisoners look like. Prisoners were smelly. Prisoners could not wash themselves. They're really bad hygiene and they were full of diseases. I mean, lice was a problem, but also like typhus and other. I mean, if you touch one, you could even like be, get a disease. And typhus was a massive problem in concentration camp. So touching a prisoner is not a thing that as soldiers would always do, or as men would generally
Mhm.
do. They would avoid it as much as they possibly could. So you see, this is also like deconstructing the myth generally. Second, of course, it's about power. It's about somebody is near you, is beautiful maybe, and you have power over the person. So of course, this whole image of it can actually go two ways, not only one way. But the sexualized image of like being taken is always like something which is a common sexual fantasy, but or being dominated by someone else sexually. So that kind of mixes all together. So I would say Capo shows a reality in a way that it could happen because in the way of Curse, I just want to go back to that. Curse actually had a was supposed there was a trial. There was actually a case against him, fight against him by the SS that he was supposed to be had an affair with a woman, and the woman she was actually inside of the brothel myself, and then released from the brothel, and she was a capo herself. But as we know today, this whole was also maybe a corruption case, maybe some kind of stealing gold, stealing Jewish gold and like selling it to the SS, and the affair was kind of a cover up of that.
Mhm.
So it's a little more complicated than just like having a sexual affair.
Mhm. Mm. Oh, that's very interesting. Thank you for this insight.
Sure.
And it sheds probably a new light on films which are still discussed. A film like The Zone of Interest is quite new compared to the other films, but I think most people have their image archives coined by watching films and series about this time. And there was this very important, obviously important TV series called Holocaust, which
Mhm.
also gave the name Holocaust to the whole event, the historical event in Germany, especially because Holocaust is a phrase very well known in the English language, but not in the German. So when you research, which I did for my book Auschwitz TV, it's very clear that the series changed the reception of that time, and also in the series you will see the young Jewish woman in the camp being under pressure from an SS man as well. So we have this sexualization in the relations of perpetrators and inmates very much in all these. And
Mhm.
also, there is a strong sexualization in recent series, especially in what is called Monster, the Ed Gein story, on Netflix, which has already in the first episode a fantasy by Ed Gein, this film is not correct in any case, not about Ed Gein in the first place, but there is the possibility that Ed Gein read about Ilse Koch in Buchenwald. She was the wife of the commander of Buchenwald, and she was known for having strange desires, and there were myths about her and talking about her. And the series, I don't know if you have seen the series
No,
on
I
Ed
haven't.
Gein. It's really like you will be like really what? It's Vicky Krieps, the really well-known actress, plays Ilse Koch in a very sexualized camp context, where she, in both senses in English language, where she, lives out kind of orgy fantasies, and it's really weird. And there is this idea of the prepared tattooed skin, which she made into lambs. As I know, there is doubt about her being being the reason for that, but it was made, and there are like these items exist in the expositions. So all this has to do a kind of with Ed Gein's own deeds, but the series is a pure fantasy, a sexualized fantasy about a true crime context, which is you can't take this seriously, because if you do, you generate like several false images, about the real life killer, his own history, the media reflection of this, because in the series you will also hear about Anthony Perkins and his homosexuality, which is really crazy, and Psycho being inspired by Ed Gein, and then later Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's all restaged for this series the same way the Ilse Koch thing is restaged. So really weird stuff. Most people from younger generations only know this. They might even know Psycho in future. They might Psycho only know from these short restaging in at the Ed Gein story, and also they might think if there ever was someone like Ilse Koch, that would be a huge scandal, just based on what the series depicts. It's really crazy how the popularization is more important than actual research, like your book, for example. But as I read your book, and definitely I read it afterwards, because my PhD was published before that, and you also refer, which is really kind, in a footnote about on this book, as on my
That's how
book
we
as
met.
well. Yeah, that's yeah,
And we met through
virtually.
a footnote.
Yeah, the footnote. Cool. And so this, but it totally makes sense, and it really inspired me to get more into this. And I wrote a second and a third book on this whole topic. And now I'm working with Michael Kosakowski on the film Holofiction, which is about the fictionalization and the iconography of the Holocaust in films. Not too much about the sexualization, I have to say. That's quite interesting, because all the other things are so much more important for the how Holocaust is remembered now, and it is remembered in images from films more than anything else. That's our idea, at least. So if we come back to your book, you came to know actual survivors of the real concentration camp brothel. How did that change your own ideas about that? What did they tell you? And did they correct your own ideas in a way when you first talked to them?
So when I first talked to survivors, first of all, I talked to Stanislav Hans is his name. Stanislav Hans. He's a wonderful person. I really liked him. I was a friend with him as well, and he was just like he was so beautiful, just like positive energy, and it was just like somebody you would like to stay with as your good friend. Unfortunately, he passed away, of course, but he many years ago. But he taught me the story, and the story of the concentration camp brothel. But he taught to me, it was pretty shocking, but also then later on, I was actually talking to some of his friends, two of his friends, or comrades, not friends, comrades from the concentration camp, who were inside of the brothel and who told me their stories. So the brothels inside of the concentration camps be built as just to give you the context, built as incentives for prisoners, for male prisoners, to boost the productivity in concentration camps. It's not for the SS guards, but for male prisoners to work harder. So when they work harder, they get a voucher, and the vouchers enable them to go to the brothel twice a week. Actually, the system was actually started in Mauthausen, and it was expanded over the entire camp system. So in all of the major concentration camps, with like a few exceptions, that's Majdanek and Großrosen, these brothels were part of the camps. They were kind of a fixed institution of the concentration camps, because Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, the head of the concentration camp system, he thought, I want the prisoners to work harder because I want to make money of them. And of course, as you know, by seeing these tortured people, these people not even to move because they don't have any food to eat, they're starving to death. Of course, they're not productive, and he would just want to increase the productivity and thought, oh, sexuality is the thing. It's kind of interesting because he thought sexuality is going to change our subject. And today we still think, oh, sexuality, it's important. So he put it in all these movies and, connect sexuality as like one of the major drives of humans, actually. So anyway, so he talks, so Stanislav Hans talks about, manages to give me the contact to his friends or comrades. And so I talked to them, and that was kind of very difficult. Because first of all, here as a German, not speaking their own language, interested in their sexual behavior, because they were visitors of the brothel in Auschwitz, and one actually he was actually in love. He was one of the women who was in Auschwitz. He actually lived in Canada later on. So these people, so I sit as a young student, and I have 3 hours of interview, and I obviously have to talk about the main history, because the visit of the brothel was kind of 0.1% of their existence. But of course, they lost people, and they were at the ramp, they talk about killing and murdering, and the crematorium, and the mass shootings, and all these horrible things. And then in the end, I asked, excuse me, how was it going to the brothel? And this is kind of, you can imagine, this is a very difficult situation. There was no one who could help me in those days, and there's still no one today who could help me if I were in the same situation today. I mean, there's all these concepts of dealing with all these of the PC ways of doing interviews with people, and creating a distance, and all these things, but it just wouldn't have helped. So in my case, I just talked to them, and in the beginning I was very shy, and then I was just like, oh gosh, I don't have the time to listen to this again. I'm sorry, I thought I didn't say this. I thought, and so I said, okay, I asked the question right away. So, but these I interviewed 30 people. 30 men and a few women as well. And their knowledge of the concentration camp brothel was very different. So in some cases, they just never heard about it. So I just asked them about sexuality in general. And very often I understood, also because I wanted to learn what is sexuality in the context of a concentration camp. So when we see Ilva, the Shiva of the SS, having sex with these guys from the actually was a POW, but anyway, was another prisoner. This how does it work? Because when you're starving, you don't have any sexual interest, of course. So this is actually one of the situations which was very difficult. And then other people talked openly about it, and I was shocked. I was shocked myself. Some people even say, "Oh, I was so good in those days. I was a young boy and I was full of energy." And that was so you can't just give a yes or no answer. It was a very difficult situation interviewing them. And I don't know if I would have done it differently, but the way I was interviewing them as a young man, as a student, as a male student, also helped me to go into their sexual kind of background and kind of opening up, which I would never have done to a woman. So, and that was the plus of my work, because I could not talk to women anymore who were inside of the brothel. I tried, but one actually refused talking to me, and she also said she went never to the brothel. She has never been in there, even though I know she was. But so she lied about this. Well, lied is not the right word, but she wasn't didn't tell the truth about it. Let's put it this way. But on the other hand, to be a man, and so that was my big plus, being a man, talking to them about these very private things. So, but it was very hard, I have to say. It was definitely tough.
I was really nervous. I remember when I attended the conference in Ravensbrück.
Hmm.
Um, and I was really nervous when I was talking about sexual fantasies in sexploitation films from the 70s in front of people. And I remember there were two survivors attending the conference as well.
Hmm.
And I said that in the beginning that it's for me it sounds really cynical to talk about sexual fantasies in films, which are based on real reality of sexual exploitation. And they later they came to me actually, and they told me what you've shown has nothing to do with what we experienced. It is
Hmm.
completely different. It's a pure fantasy. We couldn't take this seriously. It's not offending in a serious way, and it's not hurting in a way,
Hmm.
which I was really happy about this. But it also made me think because I talked about a film like The Night Porter by Liliana Cavani, which is not exactly about prostitution. It's about the relation between a female inmate who is not Jewish, and which most people think, but she's not, and an SS man who abuses her in a way. And so there is also these things are mixing up and so on. But yeah, I imagine that experiencing that for especially for the female victims of that situation is not that sexual. That's what I understood.
Hmm. Of course it is, because I mean, sexuality for women in particular played a very important role because they lost it, and they lost. I mean, the menstruation stopped. I mean, that's the first thing. As soon as they enter the camp, and all of a sudden, I mean, this like the circle of life, for women is. I mean, that's their identity. I mean, this is how this is how you organize your sex life as well, or this is the way you create a next generation. To put it in biological terms. But and losing that was horrible for women. I mean, first of all, they were happy because they didn't have to deal with like pads and whatever and bleeding inside of the camp because there was no hygienic possibilities to do that. But on the other hand side, they also understood that they're kind of not women anymore. And as soon as they kind of as the body started consuming itself, starting like at taking the fat reserves, and
Mm.
that also meant there were no secondary sexual features anymore. The breast started hanging, the bum was kind of gone away. So this is very interesting scene by I think it was uh, Lingens. Her name is I forgot her name. Sorry, but she was in Auschwitz, and she wrote in one of her testimonies. Actually, she gave her testimony to the British Library, to the Wiener Library, which was the first big Holocaust account of people of survivors from the Holocaust, done in the 1940s already by Wiener, by Mr. Wiener from Vienna in London. And in this account, she says how she looked into the mirror and she could not recognize herself anymore. We women were in the shower, in real shower, not the gas chambers, but in real showers, and we didn't recognize each other anymore. And this is kind of the loss of your sexual identity as a very important part of the loss of femininity, but also of your humanity. So it's kind of the dehumanization works through desexualization, right? And so that's
Mhm.
why, as you say, these women would never associate sexuality with the camp because they didn't have, any. So things are a bit different for the higher stratum of the camp society. So people, women, also like women in a higher position, like capos, for instance, or block elder. And these women are actually in a higher position because, they had food from the SS. They didn't have the horrible food from the prisoners' canteen, but they had food from the SS canteen because they're also helping the SS to organize the camp. They were important for the SS. And these women actually, they're all of a sudden start by having their stomach fed. All of a sudden, sexuality comes in again. And
Mhm.
here you have the circle coming back. It's like, have a rehumanization through resexualization. And this actually happens for couples, but for the majority of camp women, that does not happen. So you can see, different, you have a very short kind of an elite of the camp, a very small kind of number, like 1% of the population of the camp, who actually for those sexuality became important again. And
Mhm.
they lived it out. And also there, in female camps, for instance, in Ravensbrück, where we had our conference, that relationship between women was very common in those days, and it was, but it was always like was kind of a situational homosexuality. It was, because of women were they were heterosexual, and then in the camp there was no one available, so they just, appointed one woman and said, okay, no, I call you a boy, and then they had a sexual relationship with that, woman. So, it's a very complex situation, but sexually in the camp, you have to say, for many, many women, for many men in the camp, never had any, never played any, and there was no role for that at all, because the most important thing in the camp was trying to survive, feeding your, getting rid of your hunger, trying to find some food, and that was the main object. That was the main objective during the entire day.
Yeah. When I published my PhD, I experienced a lot of people being thinking this is a suspicious subject and trying to avoid contact, actually, and avoided to invite me and so on. When I was invited, actually, I remember a very early conference when I was very unexperienced and young at that time. Like, I was 29 when I did this PhD. So I was invited, and I was really like crucified in the discussion there. I mean, that's not unusual in academic context. It's kind of an initiation ritual, I now understand. But I always ask myself, did this actually damage form of academic career? And now, looking back, I would say yes, to a degree, it has damaged this because of the topic, because it is a taboo topic. It tangles several taboos in society, beginning with National Socialism, history, ideology. Sexualization of anything is considered taboo, and the combination of all these things is really a kind of a instant scandal, if you think. And I would be curious, did you experience similar situations in your academic life?
Surely I did. I think your subject is a little more extreme because it is
Uh-huh.
also visual, right?
Yeah.
I don't have pictures, but you're based on pictures, so it's all the images. It's like as you say in German, like a Kopfkino, right? It's a cinema in your head, which you close your eyes and think of Auschwitz, and you think of a guard like sexually abusing a Jewish woman, right? And these are in these images are over and over created, and in the sexploitation movies, and even the men adventures magazines. I mean, it's not really the story; it's the cover. So it's kind of the visualization of torture, and sexualized torture. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's generally for horror anyway. I mean, in horror, you always see like the breast of a woman before she gets hung or tortured, or the head gets chopped off. Whatever. You know better than I do about this, from your experience, as a film expert. But I have to say, I have to agree to this. And I did have, first of all, the subject was of women forced into prostitution and concentration camp, of sexual forced sex labor, was pretty much taken by a lot of feminist approaches. And I just, I kind of said, I don't want to have the feminist approach. I have a historiographic approach. I want to understand men, why they went to the brothels. So I do have to interview them. And I also want to understand how this all was organized. So of course I look on the institutions. I even look on the organization of space, inside of the brothel barracks. So this kind of gave me, kind of gave me a label of being like a sexist. And it kind of it's not it kind of helped a bit, because when a book came out, I was so precise. I mean, it was a 10 years work. I mean, I give all the numbers. I don't give the names, but I give the initials of names. So I'm very, very precise. And if something is wrong, I say, okay, I have a second source. So I'm very. I mean, it's not that I'm not. There's not a piece of the book where I would say I'm uncertain about this. I'm very certain about this. So this created a solid base of taking me serious. So people from that moment on took me serious, because because I had evidence and I could show it, and I don't show anything I can't prove. I guess it's a bit different with movies, because it's as I said, it's all images, and it's a lot of kind of vague information and myths overall. But I have to say, the pendulum is swinging back now. There's a kind of a new wave of scholars who totally either ignore me, or even call me homophobe, for instance. So I published an essay on People, on this sexual
Mhm.
violence against young men in concentration camp, which was the first one ever published. I think I opened the door for many people, and it was published in English. So we're back in the language here, the language question. So it reached a much larger audience and was broadly discussed among the Holocaust experts. Now, finally, because um, uh, uh, um, situational homosexuality, which is it's a medical term. It's used by, this is what when you talk about men, heterosexual men having a homosexual relationship in prisons. I mean, which is very common, of course. And this is like situational homosexuality. It's the situation creates a heterosexual being of being homosexual. And because of I used it, they called me homophobe. And I'm like, I mean, excuse me. And or the other day, I just read a book. Somebody, I had the book on my hand. I didn't read through it, and it was a woman. She writes about concentration camp brothels. So this is the subject of my book, and it's a smaller version of the subject of my book. But she does not cite me in a single time in this. And I go to the end, and there's actually a little footnote again. And it says, "Oh, Mr. Sommer, because of this very sexist approach, I will not cite her."
Wow.
Okay.
Well, that's harsh. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I mean, what are we trying? So, by the way, I mean, I'm also working as an activist. I mean, I initiated the first stumbling block for women from a concentration camp brothel in a cooperation with very good people from Krefeld. And that was done like last December, and it was the first stumbling block for women ever. So, and it's important for me that these women are talked about, and we remember their stories. And I'm working with other descendants of survivors actually who try to get their ancestors in the narrative of the memory and those who were in the brothels. But I mean, is that does it make me sexist? Yeah, but I guess it's just the whole way university goes in some ways. I don't know how to say that, but something it goes into a strange direction, and this is part of it. So yeah.
This is where we actually enter the cultural abyss now, in a way, because I can agree to a certain degree. You are absolutely right. Dealing with images, with moving images, especially with film, is very affective for people, and they react very subjectively, very personal, and they are rejected by certain images, and so they reject the research on this as well, which is so banal, but it is like that. Especially, it might be that more female colleagues are open about their rejection of this, but I know that there has been a lot of talk about this among everyone who came across this. I experienced a little bit of a positive change here when I began publishing chapters for my book in English over the years, because in English language, I mean, the market is much broader. It is more likely to be discovered by people who are really seriously interested in film history and in the cultural imagination and archive theories. So they are more open about this, and they don't have these very subjective taboo structures in thinking. But again, I can agree that the new identity politics and academia are getting in the way of this again. So sorry, it is very much an exchange of situation that used to be very difficult, became a little bit more open, and now for different reasons becomes more narrow again. Let's see how this will work out. I cannot complain because I'm invited very often on these topics, because I still am one of the very few people worldwide in academia covering these things and specializing. So I participated in book projects on Cavani, on Pasolini, and so on. And also I produced a lot of bonus material. You're also present, as I have to say, in the German Blu-ray of The Night Porter, which is like a reference release, because it's an 4K UHD version of the restored film with your audio commentary, and also a discussion I did with Monika Treut, a German queer filmmaker who has also strong relations connections to BDSM culture, fetish culture, and is able to reflect on this as well, and so on. So you will, like, our audience also will be able to discover these things. And I will, at this point again, um, put the hint on your book, The Concentration Camp Brothel, Forced Sexual Labor Under Nazi Rule, which is available now, and which is, one of the most, not one of them, it is the most important book on this topic worldwide. So they should read it, and everyone
I think
who's
so should.
interested. Yeah.
I mean,
Last question for today, as episodes are really dense, and now we talked a lot of very interesting stuff so far. What is your future? What are your future projects or anything you would like to talk about at this point?
yeah, so my current project I'm working on is actually another subject which is related to brothels, of course. Not of course, but it is. But I'm kind of moving out of the concentration camp context. Many people, I mean, you know that Germany had in the Nazi in the days of the war in the 1940s. The problem was in production became very difficult for Germany. So Germany had a lot of forced workers coming here. Some were invited, some were came with contracts, some were forced to work. In these factories in Germany, and this created a very difficult situation for the Nazi race politics, because all of a sudden you have a country which wanted to be clean, and Aryan, and they killed all their Jewish population, but all of a sudden they have all the foreign workers coming into a country. They're mostly, and a lot of them were actually male. And for women at that age, talking 20s, between 20 and 30, there was actually no way to get any kind of relationship to a man other than foreigners, because in Nazi Germany, because most of the German men were at the front, so they're fighting in the war or in the concentration camp, in prison. So who do you meet if you're heterosexual? And this became a massive problem for the Nazis, and because there were many of these relationships, these forbidden relationships. The question of the Nazis obviously knew about this, and they put severe punishment. So women, if they were caught, were sent to concentration camps, and men were shot for that. But this didn't help, of course, because we have a situation of war and death is anywhere. So, and what do you want to do? So finally, Heinrich Himmler again, Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, the Reichsführer SS, comes in and says, I have an idea. Let's create brothels for these foreign workers. So he convinced Hitler, and the Nazis had the plan to build at least 300 brothel barracks for foreign workers everywhere where foreign workers were living, and in all the big major cities. And this is just like, this is a ridiculous plan, because obviously, it's kind of to divert sexuality of men, thinking that male sexuality is only like an act of coitus and nothing else. It's just like you come and that's it. But in the end, totally ignoring any kind of the 99.9% of the relationship. But also this means the biggest pimp ever in history were the Nazis. I mean, they were so anti-prostitution, but then they developed a system of brothels all over the country, flächendeckend in German, or like statewide. And this is what I'm working on. So I'm trying to find out right now how many of these brothels were actually really built, because of course that was the plan, and the plan never worked out, because there's also resistance from a lot of officials, the Nazis, even on the Nazi level, in these in these little cities. I mean, they said, our city was bombed to the ground. Why should we have a brothel barrack for the foreigners when our local people need a place to stay, right? And so, and I'm working on the subject, and I started doing this already many years ago in 2004. I already started doing my first research on it, and finally I come to the conclusion that it's time to write a book now. I kind of let it sit aside because I thought I want to get out of the subject for many years, but now I thought it's important to talk about it. Yeah, because again, the Nazis were so different from what they kind of suggested they were. Like the image is like they black uniforms, straightforward, family is everything, no sexuality except with your wife, only to make great children. But then, they created brothels for the foreign workers. And it's just absolutely ridiculous. But it shows how fascist regimes work, They're totally, most of the time, they're the opposite of what they promise, actually. And then this is goes to authoritarian systems as well. So.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fascinating point. But I also think of the breeding programs like the Lebensborn, which is also kind of a brothel coupling situation, which was organized by the Nazis themselves. So being the big pimps in Europe at that time is kind of accurate
Yeah, it
and
totally is.
as strange as it sounds. And so, yeah, we will definitely stay with your work there. And yeah, I'm just finishing the book on holofiction, accompanying the film by Michael Kosakowski, which
Mhm.
is about to come to cinemas in Germany as well by the end of 2026. So there's quite interesting expansion of new fields of interest there in yeah, how our past is actually remembered, and that's our mission as people doing research and presenting these results. So I hope yeah, people stay with us. And thank you very much, Robert, to attend this podcast and talk
Well,
about your
thank
work.
you for having me here.
Yeah, and hope to see you soon. And goodbye.
Thank you so much, and goodbye to everyone. Bye.